launch of Life on the Margins, a celebration of the latest delicious collection of short stories and flash fiction from the Scottish Arts Trust Story Awards.
The book is packed with stories of romance, drama, tragedy, with modern-day legends and ghostly tales, with laugh-out-loud comedy and some stories that are just frankly and delightfully ridiculous.
Let's start with our cover story, Life on the Margins by Sean Laird, read for us by the wonderful Maureen Beattie.
The hardback edition of Persuasion caught my eye in that neglected old Blackheath bookshop, squatting thickly on the musty shelf, begging my attention. Idly flicking its yellowing pages, I was drawn to an inscription in the margin. Anne, this book, a gift for you, is also a gift for myself. Forgive me this test. The tale in this book has almost run, and if you are still reading, then there is hope that your heart finds a mirror in my own, and that my blossoming love be true. If you have cast this book aside, then by fate's chance, must I too be cast aside. Over the page was written, Fred, it is true that I have feelings for you. Perhaps I have been too meek. I return this book with the wish that you will read this and know that my heart desires you. Page after page, the slender margins yielded expressions of lives lived in shared conversation, annotations on the small human dramas of joy and grief. In time, these two were joined by other voices. I love you most, Mummy, but I don't want a brother. Evie, 7.5. Within the observations, remarks, and rebukes, you will so regret that, of family holidays, new chapters, fallow periods, then frantic memos, was love soaked in ink and time. The entry on the final page was, Frederick Andrew Hollins, my father, died this January, followed by Anne, my mother, 3 days later. My words run dry. Evelyn, 14/2/72.
The launch of Life on the Margins is going to bring us some rare readings by leading stars of stage and screen, by the incredible Alan Cumming, the timeless Ali MacGraw, the sublime John Bett, and the fabulous Maureen Beattie. These wonderful actors have donated their readings in memory of a very special friend of the Scottish Arts Trust Story Awards, the stunning dramatic actor Maurice Roy-Eaves. Vanessa, will you tell us about Maurice?
My husband Maurice loved words, spoken and written. As an actor, he relished the way that words could be used to express the inner soul of a character he played, such as the lecherous Vinny in John Byrne's Tutti Frutti, a blasphemous god in Irvine Welsh's Acid House, Stephen Dedalus in Joyce's Ulysses, and the doomed Colonel Munro in Last of the Mohicans. One of his greatest pleasures was to seek out unknown writers on the bookshelves of our favourite bookshops in Edinburgh and Santa Fe, New Mexico. While sadly the loss of sight meant towards the end of his life he was unable to read, he was constantly quizzing me about the stories I was reading for the Scottish Arts Trust, short stories and flash fictions, and he particularly enjoyed the awards. I'm so proud that this year's anthology is dedicated to him, and that our dear friends Ali MacGraw, John Bett, Alan Cumming and Maureen Beattie are reading some of the stories in his memory. They're beautifully told, and just a taster of the wonderful wealth of storytelling that lies between the covers of Life on the Margins. Please enjoy, and please buy the book.
Yes, please buy the book. All proceeds from sales are used to support the Story Awards, which began in 2014 with the Scottish Arts Club Short Story Competition. That competition would never have got off the ground if it had not been for the support of Alexander McCall Smith, who was our chief judge until 2019.
I was associated with the Scottish Arts Club short story competition from the beginning. It was a wonderful thing to do, to ask people to submit short stories for this competition. We had great fun in reading the many very interesting entries that were sent in, and I think that we also managed to start off more than one literary career in this way. I do hope that the competition continues to be a success and that it gives people the opportunity to express themselves in this wonderful genre.
Life in the Margins includes more than 20 writers who are appearing in print for the first time, like Peter Kelly, writer of A Christmas Surprise, the winner of the 2020 short story competition. Peter is a firefighter who lives in Irvine in Ayrshire. Peter's story, A Christmas Surprise, will be read for us by Alan Cumming.
But please be aware that this story does contain some strong language.
I hate my life. Everyone will be getting it on at Jimbo's party, but what am I doing? Traipsing around George Square with my gran. Brilliant. I bet Natalie's there. I bet that clown Tam will be trying to fire in about her. Fuck's sake, man. Look at this, Charles, my gran said, holding up some crap from a stall. Our Rebecca would look so cute in this. What do you think? I couldn't give a fuck about an elf baby grow. Definitely, Gran, that would be smashing. I knew you'd like it, son, she said, fishing her purse from her handbag. I sighed and glanced to the heavens. Flashing LEDs of a Santa waving caught my eye. What a prick. Don't get me wrong, I love my Gran, and she's been taking me to the Christmas market since I was a wee boy, but I'm not a wee boy anymore. And did she have to pick a Saturday night? After getting her change, a whole fucking penny, from the guy at the stall, she turned. Right, son, I think that's me sorted. I just need something for Angela's wee one. You know, the young lassie next door, she... I don't care. But I'll just pick something up next time. I still don't care. I want to go home. Oh, and I need to get a bottle of gin for Mary. You know, my bingo pal. Oh, here we go with that bingo shite. Kill me now. My ears pricked at the word home. What? I said. I was saying, is there anything you want to do before we go home? No, Gran, I'm good. Let's go. What about the skating? You used to love scooting around the rink. I probably did. When I was 5. No, Gran, I think I'll give it a miss. I've got a big game tomorrow. Don't want to risk going over my ankle. She shook her head and tutted. You and your football. You need to let your hair down once in a while and enjoy yourself. If I hadn't been dragged here, my hair would be all the way down to the fucking ground by now. What can I say, Gran? I'm keen as. You are so, she said with a laugh. Come here, son. She hooked her arm onto mine. My old legs aren't what they used to be. A bit of me died inside as I shuffled toward Queen Street with a pensioner hanging on to me. She looked like E.T. waddling along beside me with her brown coat and headscarf. At least nobody would be here to see me. We eventually reached the stairs to the train station. 2 big coppers with guns stood at the foot of the stairs, and 2 with dogs were at the top. We climbed the stairs slower than one of the tools with the green P plates on their car. I pulled my phone out. 18:25. See if we missed this train. We reached the top, and I nearly shat myself when one of the police dogs started barking and straining at its leash. It must not have liked the look of me. I looked at the copper holding the dog back, and my heart sank. He was looking right at me, beckoning me with one finger. What is this? The dog shut up when the policeman commanded it to sit. He pointed towards a doorway, away from the stream of people who were having a right good gawk as they walked past. He passed the leash to his colleague before joining us. "What's your name?" he said. "Chaz." "Do I look like one of your pals?" he barked, scarier than the dog by his side. "The day I'm pals with a copper is the day I become a loner." "No," I said, with a shake of the head. "Then give me the full name your parents gave you." "Show some respect, Charles," my gran said, cuffing me around the ear. I had to stop myself asking the big copper to do her with assault. "It's Charles MacLeod." "Officer," my gran said in her best telephone voice, "is there something wrong?" "Ma'am, we need to ask your grandson a few questions." He turned his attention back to me. "How old are you, Charles?" 16. "Do you have anything on you shouldn't have?" I shook my head. "No." "Then you won't mind if we search you?" "Actually, I do mind. Fill your boots." "Empty your pockets, please." I rummaged around in my pockets, coming away with a phone, some cash, keys, and a half-empty packet of chewing gum. "Do you have any sharps on you?" he said, as he snapped on a pair of those blue gloves doctors wear. "What, like needles?" "Needles, knives, scissors. Anything that could injure me." "Nah, this is all I've got." He either never heard me or didn't believe me, as he had a good rummage himself. "Hold your arms out like this," he said, mimicking the motion. I sighed and rolled my eyes, but did as commanded. "The less attitude, the easier this will be," he said. Easier for who? His rubber-protected fingers swept through my hair, felt behind my ears, under my collar, and along both arms. I gagged at his cheap aftershave as his hands reached around and down my back. He stuck both thumbs in my waistband and swept around until they met at the front. He squatted as he ran his hands down both legs, his hands coming dangerously close to my pecker. "Slip your trainers off, pal." Oh, so we're pals now. Cold concrete seeped through my thin socks. He finished inspecting my shoes and signalled for me to put them on. He stood and looked at his colleague with a puzzled look on his face. "There's one more thing before you can go, Charles. The train's long gone, so do what you want." "Sure. Is it okay if my dog has a sniff around about you?" "Officer," my gran said. Her telephone voice was gone, replaced by a slight hint of annoyance. "Is this necessary? We have a train to catch." "Ma'am, it won't take a minute." "What do you say, Charles?" I glanced at the dog, then back at the copper. "Does it bite?" A sleek smile crept over his face. "Only if I tell her to." A copper with a sense of humour. They should put him on display. "Fine." "Cara," he said, clicking his fingers in front of me. Cara sprung into action and held her snout high. She sniffed the air as she approached and kept doing so as she passed me before coming to a rest between me and my gran. She put her snout against my gran's bag and froze, with only her tail wagging. What the fuck? The two coppers glanced at each other with wide eyes before turning their attention on my gran. "Ma'am," the first one said, "is there something you—" Yes, all right, sorry," she said as she unzipped her bag. "You know, I'm quickly becoming a cat person." If looks could kill, then the dog with its snout against Gran's handbag would be dead. "Cara, sit." She produced a small jam jar from her bag. It wasn't filled with jam. "Wait till I see that boy," she said. "He told me glass jars kept the smell contained." "Cara's sense of smell is stronger than you think." "Is that right?" said my gran. "It's a pity she didn't have a cold." She handed him the jar. He looked like he was trying to keep from laughing. The moment he unscrewed the lid, we all caught the scent Cara had picked up. "Ma'am," he said, as his eyes darted to me, "is this yours?" "Less of the ma'am, sonny. I'm not the queen. My name's Jean MacLeod, and yes, it's mine. Fuck me. Gran likes a smoke. Are you aware this is cannabis? I hope it is, else that would be another reason to chin that boy. The copper stole a glance at his colleague, holding the two dogs. He too looked to be fighting the urge to laugh. And are you aware cannabis is illegal? Very. I'm also aware it shouldn't be. It's an absolute joke that they can say something so... Look, man, Jean. I'm not here to debate the law. I'm only here to enforce it. And right now, this is illegal. Right or wrong, one thing I do know, buying this lines the pockets of drug dealers. Sonny, I've lined the pockets of the biggest drug dealers on the planet. For 15 years I bought their junk. Paracetamol, cocodamol, ibuprofen, diclofenac, methotrexate. And what did it do for my chronic arthritis? Not a thing. Sure, they masked the pain for a while until I built up a tolerance. So, their pushers, my doctor, fed me more and more stronger and stronger pills until I became hooked. And the only thing numb was me. So yes, you're right. It's not ideal lining dope dealers' pockets, but at least they're honest about what they do. I was stunned. The coppers looked stunned. Even Cara looked sheepish for grassing on my gran. Jean, began the copper. He looked serious. Does this really work? Son, the first night I took it, I had the best sleep of my life. I woke up feeling like I did in my 20s. Before lunch, I'd gutted the house, did the washing and ironing. I even hung the new curtains I bought years before. Since using this medicine, I've been pain-free. It really has given me a new lease of life. Never thought I'd say this, but the sooner we follow the Yanks' lead, the better. And if we confiscate it? Her body slumped, and she gazed into the distance. I don't even want to think about what tonight will be like. The copper glanced at his colleague, who gave a slight nod. He screwed the lid on tight and slipped it into my gran's handbag. Did you say something about having a train to catch? I did. My gran zipped her bag shut and flashed them a big smile. Thanks, son. The police officer nodded and returned the smile. Safe journey. He turned and resumed his position at the top of the stairs. We walked through the station in awkward silence and boarded our train. We sat across from one another and our eyes met. Well, I said, at least I know what to get you for Christmas. Charles, if I ever catch you buying dope, I'll break every one of your fingers. I smiled and looked out the window. Turns out Gran's a bit of a badass.
Our next story, Flashpoint by Sherry Morris, is another dramatic tale. Originally from America's heartland, Sherry now lives in the Scottish Highlands. Flashpoint is a wonderful example of how much story can be packed into just 250 words.
We are deeply honoured to have Flashpoint read for us by Ali McGraw.
Urgency propels Maud to the open window where Herman sits below. Her mouth burns from the bomb that's hurtled down the phone line and landed in her gut. The fuse sears her throat. It'll do worse to Herman, sitting in the shade of the station's awning, protected from the fierce Midwestern summer sun, humming My Way. Old fool, she thinks. His back is to her. The tall pumps with their round red heads, rectangular bodies, and open faces like slow children stand nearby, ready to serve. They're all that keep him company while he watches road and sky. Both are empty. Cars prefer the interstate now. Decades ago, people came, buying gas, penny sweets, and pop. Now, not even a cloud passes. His stillness gives her pause. There's no clatter or patter today, no puttering about. Once she speaks, peace will be shattered. Sheltering in shop shade won't be an option. They'll never be happy again. Maybe he'll blame her, but she's done her part, clipping coupons, endlessly mending, never minding not having you. He assured her they'd be fine handling things his way. All the little sacrifices she's borne for nothing. The sizzle in her stomach intensifies, stings her mouth. She clears her throat, ready to detonate with news. Without turning, he says, "Come, sit with me, my love." She notices the box of red-top safety matches on his knee, smells the puddle of petrol, sees the letters in his hand, realizes who's been shielded all along.
There's such variety within the pages of Life on the Margins. From the extremes of Flashpoint, we go to Paul Walton's delightfully absurd flash fiction story, 14.
14 was shortlisted for the 2020 Edinburgh Flash Fiction Award and won our first Golden Hare Award, given to the top flash fiction story entered by a writer living in Scotland.
14 will be read for us by the always entertaining John Bett.
He's maybe 14. Bairns prowling around the long legs, and he just rushes you there on the towpath, polybag held high, and you know something is in there. Something with mass. Shoves it in your chest, and the fingers start to work open twisted polythene. You're thinking, oh Christ, don't let it be body parts or shite or a vibrator. See this, he says. The pike is there, in a half-inch of canal water. A youngster, jaws clamped, furious and still. You say, "Ya beauty!" and he nods and you become 14 with him there. And a boy jumps up and grabs at the bag, and to save breaking fin or gill, he just lets it go. Laddie careers about with a weighted prize. There's no reprimand as a lengthened palm extends, unfolding, upturned, and the bag is returned to it. And they laugh together, and that wee one is made 14 too.
The stories don't get much more graphic and entertaining than Gustin the Gusset by Joe Lerman. Joe's an agricultural journalist living on the family farm in Aberdeenshire.
Gustin the Gusset is read for us by Maureen Beattie.
Ishbel Mary was slumped on the kitchen table, her expansive bosom spread like scone dough amongst the breakfast crumbs. Absent-mindedly, she turned the clothes pegs over in the pocket of her spring muslin pinny, staring into space as the wind whistled through the ill-fitting glazing and slammed rain against the window. It was gone 7. The tea in her mother's Paragon teacup had long since gone cold, and still she hadn't been out to peg the pants on the line. Heaving herself up from the table, Ishbel Mary stumbled a little as her bosom slid into place. She trailed her hand over the clothes in the untied bags as she made her way across the kitchen to the back door. The peculiar smell of black bags and washing powder comforted her. She pulled on a bouclé coat from the nearest bag. It wasn't the ideal choice, what with the rain, but there was life in it yet, and the fit was better than she cared to admit. Ishbel Mary firmly knotted a checked head square under her chin and lifted the ancient serge pants from their hook. 3 generations of Campbell women before her had hung these pants on the line at Gutter for the daily gust in the gusset ritual, a weather-predicting tool the family had come to rely on. For the past 7 weeks, Ishbel Mary had wearily shouldered the responsibility, Hanging the pants out each morning gave her a little victory in her tussle with unrelenting apathy. Her character and nature were, under normal circumstances, like her shoes, stout, ideal for surviving and occasionally thriving in uncompromising conditions. But this apathy was proving to be an unpleasant, lingering bedfellow. As she emerged from the shelter of the house, the wind worried at her head square and the rain stung her cheeks. The clothesline was at the back of the Croft house, strung parallel to the shore to catch the air. Ishbel Mary trudged along the sheep track through the heather and rocks and across the moss to the line. Here, on the most westerly island of the archipelago, wind was the dominant meteorological feature, of the very reason why the ritual had evolved. Ishbel Mary pegged the substantial pants in the middle of the line and stepped back respectfully to watch their flight. She expertly assessed the angle. 38 degrees. Today would be a good day. Any angle of pant flap less than 90 degrees is a good day in the west. The wind turbine's frantic whirring on the hill above the Croft caught her eye. It must have been there a good 2 years now. No, 3. Could it really be 3 years? It was. She remembered now. It had been that Hogmanay. Oh, how could she have forgotten? She'd been home from Glasgow, and the possibility of putting up a wind turbine was the talk of the village. Campbell Hill, their hill, was, it transpired, the most suitable site for it. Her mother had railed against it from the outset. She hated the idea of the turbine looming over the Croft, its long flickering shadows probing right into the house. Ishbel Mary had eventually persuaded her to let the project go ahead, but not without some ferocious rows that knocked the wind out of them both. Ishbel Mary now regretted her lack of patience, ashamed by the way she'd dismissed the elderly woman's concerns. She'd behaved badly, and that was that. Tears stung the back of her eyes. The wind turbine was part of the fabric of the place now, generating power to pump water from the loch up to a header tank which supplied the whole village. Her mother had no truck with this alchemy of wind and water, and resolutely continued to draw water from the loch every morning, hurtling down the track with her wooden bucket until she was well into her dotage. The taste, she proclaimed, was far superior. The screeching of gulls wheeling overhead startled Ishbel Mary and brought her reminiscing to an end. Oh, what a calamity! The hazards of living on the coast. Guano slid slowly down the pant's navy blue shirring and into the moss below. Ishbel Mary's gusset had been sullied. It was sure to need a boil wash now. She pulled the tainted briefs from the line and stomped back into the house, cursing those birds. The very thought of boiling the guano-covered pants and the accompanying smell of herring it would bring made Ishbel Mary shudder. She held the pants behind her back in the hope that would delay the rank smell wafting into her flaring nostrils. It didn't. She balked. A good soaking, that was what was needed. Mentally running through the containers she would be willing to sacrifice for such a purpose, Ishbel Mary drew a blank. The stench hit her again, galvanising her into action. She rushed through to the bathroom, lifted the lid on the toilet cistern and unceremoniously dumped the pants in. The ideal place. With each flush, the water would be changed and the guano would be washed away in no time. Ishbel Mary was gleeful she had happened upon the perfect solution. The last time she could remember the gusset being sullied was that Hogmanay 3 years before, when she'd gone birdwatching with Donald John. The invitation had been unexpected. They'd got chatting at Willie the Boat's, where most of the village had gathered for a ceilidh. Separately, they had made their way into the front room to escape the singing. It was only themselves in there, so chatting had been required, but thankfully not a song. Despite no interest whatever in birds, Ishbel Mary had accepted his offer of a walk to the cliffs at Ness, keen to be away from her mother for a while. Surprisingly, the day had been glorious. Just the two of them, amidst the maelstrom of skirling birds. She was sure she'd seen a shag on the horizon. Even now, the slightest whiff of rubberised waterproofs took her straight back to that day. It had been romantic. Ishbel Mary was sure of that. Well, hadn't Donald John brought a picnic? Thick slices of black bun left over from Hogmanay. She'd taken a wee ginger bottle full of her homemade Blaeberry gin. It stained their lips and loosened their tongues. Although her legs were cocooned in 3 layers of outdoor garb, Ishbel Mary had been acutely aware that she was touching Donald John as they lay on the sparkling gneiss. Donald John McIver. The very mention of Ishbel Mary's neighbour made her cheeks glow like the slap of sleet in a southwesterly. Donald John ran, cycled and laughed through her earliest memories, assuming a lead role in what in reality was only a bit part. He was a couple of years older, of course, the same age as Angus and Jamie. As children, they'd run wild over the shore and the hill before self-consciousness descended abruptly. Ishbel Mary could still see the shadow of the boy, although Donald John was well through his 50s now. He was tall and straight-backed, with just a smattering of hair and all his own teeth. Unlike Ishbel Mary and her brothers, Donald John had never left, content with life on his piece of land between the sea and sky. Ishbel Mary stared wistfully out of the rain-streaked windows, across the peat hags to Donald John's inn-by, hoping for a glimpse of him, or even Tess, his collie, would suffice. Some other living thing. She missed the stir and the possibilities Glasgow had proffered, and now seriously regretted the fact that she had partaken in precious few. The view from the window reminded her of a badly executed watercolour painting, where tiny hints of colour bleed together into a sweep of muddied brown. Today, an unfamiliar block of colour stood out, bright red. A van. The post van. Surely Donald John must be having a delivery. Elspeth the post was parked by the buyer. Next morning, Ishbel Mary lay late in bed, loath to face another day. She was contemplating the intricacies of the spider's web in the greying lace trim of the lampshade when a loud rap at the door scattered her thoughts. Ishbel Mary threw the warm eiderdown aside, mortified she'd been caught having a lie-in. She kicked round the side of her curtains, wiping a swathe of condensation from the window with her sleeve. Donald John was standing outside her porch. Ishbel Mary quickly rummaged in the bottom drawer and extracted a bold blue jumper with the word "Fabulous" emblazoned across the front in a jaunty orange. She whipped it on over the top of her winceyette nightie and made for the porch. She took a moment to arrange herself in an alluring manner amongst the damp waterproofs and wellies, her heart thumping so hard that she felt certain that Donald John would hear. Ishbel Mary knew her moment had come. She opened the door. "Oh, it's yourself, Donald John. Good morning to you," she breathed. "Have you water?" he demanded. This was not the opening gambit she'd been hoping for. "What?" asked Ishbel Mary, sure she'd misheard. "Have you water in your taps?" Donald John tried to make his question crystal clear, rather like the missing water. "Well, I'm sure I don't know, Donald John. I'm just this minute out of bed." For Ishbel Mary, the atmosphere was electric. Sparks were flying. Indeed, they were. The stiff breeze coming in at the door was rubbing her winceyette nightie on a cagoule, creating a static storm to rival the aurora borealis. Years of stifled emotions and pent-up lust threatened to overwhelm Ishbel Mary, but oblivious to anything other than a slight fire hazard, Donald John broke the moment. "Aye, and the pants aren't out. Elspeth says she'll not be knowing what strength of hairspray to use, if she ever gets her shower, that is." Ishbel Mary's eyes narrowed. Elspeth the post. Elspeth the bloody post. So, Donald John was availing himself of the comprehensive range of services the Western Isles Postal Service offered. Slowly, Ishbel Mary intertwined her fingers and rested them across her bosom. She composed herself by inhaling deeply before replying, "Oh, why, now that I think of it, Donald John, I have plenty of water, thank you. It's a pity you have none yourself." The trace of a wry smile flickered across her lips. Without giving him a chance to respond, she shut the door and went through to the kitchen. Picking up her mother's Buckley coat, she buried her face in it and sobbed. Quietly at first. It was gone 7 by the time she'd pulled herself together. The weather-predicting pants were still in the cistern. Ishbel Mary went through to the bathroom. She heard the water before she saw it. Looking out the small square panes of glass in the bathroom window, she could see a torrent of water cascading from the overflow down the outside wall. She lifted the lid of the cistern and saw the pants draped over the ballcock, wedging it down. No wonder there was no water. She gently replaced the cistern lid and went to look for her mother's wooden bucket. There were definitely still traces of guano there. The pants would need to soak a while longer. A good while longer.
Transplanted Californian author Gail Anderson has 3 very different stories in Life on the Margins. Her sweeping Hawaiian tale Paradise, her gritty cinematic story Hunger Point, which took 3rd prize in 2020, and Overdue, a delightful tale of romance among Oxford librarians, which won the competition in 2019 and is read for us now by John Bett.
When their eyes locked over the cheese dip at the Bodleian Library's Christmas party, Alexandria Pergamon and Constance Celsus felt the stirrings of something long overdue. Constantine, a cataloguer for the medieval dentistry collection, worked in the south sub-basement. Alexandria, a more senior member, worked reference in special collections, 3rd floor north. Dark and light, day and night. It is truth that cataloguers and reference specialists are the oil and water, the Montagues and Capulets of the library world. Their paths had never before crossed, and the fact was that Constantine was married, that Alexandria, after a series of vivid disappointments, had embraced celibacy. And yet, in the new year, Alexandria received a series of book requests written in a bold, forward-leaning hand. The yearningly interrogative 823.44, One Sign of Love, brackets fiction, semicolon 19th century comma, English, end brackets. The deliciously bawdy 641.509, Take ye this luscious tart, brackets cookery, semicolon 17th century comma, baking, end brackets. The boldly instructive M93.E00206, Undressing the Union, brackets labour, political activity, end brackets. Constantine returned from lunch to find a daring request to reclassify a title within his own subject area, Fill the Cavity, from 617.62, brackets Roll of Dentistry, end brackets, to 617.64, brackets Endodontics, early, end brackets. The following morning, Alexandria received a citation inquiry that stole her breath. 808.80369, The Pop-Up Book of Braille Erotica, brackets literature, esoteric, end brackets. She returned the form, stamped in red ink. This item long overdue, urgent action required to meet patron need. But these were rash, wanton acts, both of them new, and they were not deaf to the voices of stigma and scandal. This could not be seduction in the stacks, coitus among the carols. It was time to move beyond the walls of the Bodleian, but where? The Buttery in Broad Street was out of the question, as was Brown's in the Covered Market. Both were too popular, too well thumbed by colleagues from both sides of the divide. Finding a rendezvous in Oxford, which was not right round the corner from one of the 29 Bodleian branch libraries, was a task requiring almost superhuman research abilities. At length, Alexandria slid a set of requests into the pneumatic tube and sent it sucking away to the sub-basement. PN.U65B90. Gao DVD. Go West. Brackets. Comedy Films. Marx Brothers. End brackets. X07.E00990. The Other Side of the Tracks. Brackets. Fiction. Semicolon. World War I. End brackets. X00.H00289. Paddy. Brackets. Prejudices. Boston, comma, Irish Americans. End brackets. Muse. E.Pop.1903.166. Out he went at 7 in the morning. Brackets. Employment, comma, songs. End brackets. Thus it was that before work the next day they met at Mick's Transport Cafe, tucked behind the railway station. There, over chipped mugs of steaming strong tea and surrounded by blaspheming cabbies wolfing full English, Constantine wasted no time. "There's something I need to do with you," said he, in a low voice laden with intensity. "Yes." Alexandra's throat was tight. "Something my wife won't even consider." He leaned forward, elbowing the sauces masterfully to one side. For Alexandria, the sheer electricity of the moment blurred the checkered, oiled cotton tablecloth beneath her into something resembling a barcode. Constantine's secret passion, long held, closely guarded, was for medieval stained glass. Specifically, for a design so rare that it occurred in only a handful of locations in England, the Lily Crucifixion, depicting the Saviour martyred on the outstretched fronds of a lily. "A lily," said Alexandria, stunned. "Lilium cedidium," he clarified. "The Madonna lily." Alexandria, lured with an explicit promise of carnal pleasure, and now confronted with the flower of virginal purity, was 2 heartbeats away from walking out. But, as Constantine spoke, explaining how by tradition the yellow flower had turned white as the Madonna picked it, she reflected. So many empty nights spent holding nothing warmer than a cup of orange pekoe. There was passion in his zealot's eyes, certainly, and therein, perhaps, the makings of a quest. And so she vowed, over their shared plate of number 12 beans on toast, to accompany him in visiting all 5 of the ancient windows on his list. They travelled. At the Church of St. Edmund in Effing Badger, Shropshire, they stood side by side beneath a Gothic window, bathed in coloured light, their fingers barely touching. At St. Dunstan's, in Great Fossick, Cornwall, they made so bold as to hold hands. At St. Barnabas in Tooting Bottom, Yorkshire, they kissed, shyly. But it was at St. Hermione in the Wilderness and Chipping Marrow, Oxfordshire, that opportunity stirred and opened one eye. For it was here that Alexandra discovered that the key had been left in the lock on the inside of the church door. It was a heavy, ornate key. It was festooned with a tassel of the deepest scarlet. As Constantine made his way towards the apse, clutching a pamphlet, 50p in aid of the Font Restoration Fund, Alexandra took this key in both her hands and turned it, locking the door behind them. Constantine was seated on the edge of a raised granite tomb, gazing silently at the tracery, when her shadow fell across him. She laid her hands on his shoulders, pushed them gently onto his back, across the polished surface of the granite, and slid herself over him. He watched her as she teased open the buttons on his shirt. He fumblingly helped her undo the buckle of his belt before laying back on the tomb and spreading his arms in mirror of the lily glass over their heads. Then they were in the throes, jolting, thrusting, an apocalypse, the coming of the rapture, spine arching, head thrown back. Alexandra opened her eyes and found herself staring directly into the unblinking lens of a CCTV camera. For a week they waited for facial recognition technology to forge a damning link between recent activities and their driving license photographs. But the authorities were presumably more interested in metal thieves. The dreaded call from the police, from church elders, from the Bodleian, never materialized. The blow, when it fell, came from an entirely unexpected quarter. The video, Lo, lively recumbents get medieval in Oxfordshire church, 3 exclamation marks, went viral, breaking all previous YouTube records in just 14 hours. And while their gyrating sacrilege spread across the globe, closer to home, medieval churches were inundated with tourists, and the more enterprising of local teenagers was selling souvenir condoms at a profit. That Monday morning, Alexandra's usually peaceful reference room was crowded with chortling undergraduates. She didn't care. What mattered was that she and Constantine now despaired of completing their quest, of seeing their 5th and final Lily crucifixion. They hadn't the heart to brave the crowds. Not far away, in peaceable Charberley, the local Women's Institute chapter had finished their tea and biscuits, concluded their review of the last meeting's minutes, and were engaged in a lively discussion of short courses in architectural history. Their fervour led them first to Oxford University's continuing education website, and from that safe harbour into the choppy waters of the wider internet. The chapter secretary, whose interests extended barely beyond jam-making, dismissed each suggestion as it was made. Art Deco, licentious. Brutalism, beastly. Rococo, naked cherubs. Roman, oh my dears, orgies. The membership, restive, put it to a vote, and only then was the phrase medieval churches typed with martyred reluctance into the search box by the chapter secretary, a woman known to her few friends as Dear Felicity, but more generally known as Mrs. Constantine Celsus. Constantine spent the next several weeks withdrawn from circulation, camping in dark corners of the Bodleian sub-basement, his shoes and effects shelved in among 947.073 brackets war civil English brackets. Alexandra met him again for their regular tryst at Mix. They could have met at the Buttery or anywhere, as they had no more secrets to keep, but old habits die hard. They warmed themselves over their plate of number 12, and Alexandra saw that Constantine's eyes were shining. His inadequately shaven cheeks were glowing. He slid a magnolia-coloured citation card across the table, face down. She turned it over. DT 298.C7RB, the end of the siege, brackets Constantine, semicolon, Algeria, comma, history. 306.88 Rue, liberty at last, brackets, monograph, semicolon, divorce, end brackets. And stamped below in black ink, the resource is now available. They didn't miss seeing their final lily crucifixion at St. Michael at the North Gate, right there in Oxford. They stood before it, listening, as an adaptation of the Bodleian Oath was read out. Do you pledge to preserve this precious volume? Reference specialists on the bride's side of the aisle, cataloguers on the groom's. Alexandra and Constantine each carried accession bouquets, lilium candidium, bright as dazzling white trumpets.
We were delighted when Andrew O'Hagan agreed to take over as our chief judge in 2020. Earlier this year, I asked him, what does he look for in a short story?
I think, initially, in that first read-through, what you're looking for is economy of language, brevity, but also a sort of power. There needs to be a power within the short story that's apparent almost from the first sentence, if not from the first words. There is no space in a short story for that kind of elongation of intention and tone. You don't arrive eventually after 200 pages, as you do with Dostoevsky, at not only the point, but as it were, the style and the tone of the thing. The short story, you've got to be in there precisely from the top of the piece. So what you're looking for in that first read through is whether it has a voice or not. So much writing is similar to other writing. You're looking for that vital spark, that essential signature of individuality. And all the great short story writers, whether they be Chekhov or Alice Munro or James Kelman and Ernest Hemingway, they all have a signature. It's almost written in invisible ink between the lines. And that's what you're looking for, is a touch of that.
The winner of the 2020 Edinburgh Flash Fiction Award was Kerry Rawlinson, who lives in beautiful British Columbia. Her powerfully imagined story, Armed and Semi-Dangerous, is read for us by Alan Cumming.
Our ragged brigade set off to battle the Res Boys hours ago. Our weapons? Wooden spoons nicked from our ma's kitchens. Sticks. Chipped cricket bats. Harry Fallon pilfered a precious cigarette, which got smoked down to our fingertips minutes into the march. And I stole combat rations, 3 larded crusts. But with the smoke break, then Harry puking, then piss stops for the smaller boys, it's taken forever to forward the troops. In the changeling mist and needling rain, we wonder, what more do our fathers and brothers have to face over there? We're desperate to be just like them. Heroes. Far across the waters, colonial Canada's token contributions to the Great War are leaving pieces of themselves behind in trenches and blood-drenched mud. Slivers of soul, folds of lost reason, whole bodies, We haven't yet realised that heroes seldom come home. Only strangers wearing our father's old skins. But these thoughts are fleeting. Drenched, lacking enemy contact, we decide to turn our stamp-rationed boots towards home. Approaching the muskeg designated no man's land, a thin banshee screech suddenly splits the twilight. We skitter like startled chicks, but what? It's Harry's ma. It's Mrs. Fallon, stumbling towards us, wailing, high fists clawing for her only son. Harry! Father! Your father! We shuffle, disoriented by this naked display of adult grief. And as the blood-soaked sun sinks slowly on dead fathers and brothers, comprehension dawns, routing our childish acceptance of the ordinariness of war. Something of our tenuous innocence, along with the daylight, snuffs out.
Some of the stories tell the tale through pure conversation, like our next very entertaining reading, I've Killed George, written by retired teacher Bob Shepherd. I've Killed George will be read for us by John Bett.
What? You heard? No, not sure I did. A look of incredulity spread around Ellie's eye as she stared hard at him. Tony swilled his brandy nonchalantly. I said I've killed George, and I'm glad. He began laughing. No, you don't mean it. You can't have. Tony shrugged. Too late. It's done. It's not too late, Tony. Change it. Tony took a huge gulp, letting the warming liquid satisfy his tongue and gums with its spicy taste. There's no turning back. Ellie stooped to kneel at his feet. But he's your star, your biggest earner. 5 million viewers will hate you. He is Canterbury Avenue. He's gone. Ellie stared pleadingly. Tony, please, do a rewrite. Peter won't mind. Tony threw her a look of indifference. We'll spin out his death. It'll double the ratings. He took another gulp. We'll have a fight that goes badly wrong. He falls, hits his head. Ellie felt lost for words. Trouble is, he's disappeared. Missed 2 rehearsals. We might have to use doubles and old clips. Ellie walked away and stood silent for a moment. You know, don't you? Tony nodded. How long? Long enough. Is that why you wrote him out? What do you think? That's pathetic, Tony. I had to put up with you and Janie. That was different. Just, The doorbell interrupted him. Ellie walked across to the window. It's the police. What do they want? Obvious, isn't it? Not to me. Told you. I've killed George.
Jupiter Jones has 2 short stories and a piece of flash fiction in this anthology. Her writing's always dramatic, but in this work, Judith, she adds a wonderfully ridiculous edge. Ali McGraw reads Judith.
We were sitting on the veranda under the quince tree, drinking chocolate and enjoying the last of the sun's sallow light. The best days of summer were gone. Soon the evening air would chill. Hester, always industrious, was knitting rainbow blankets for the orphanage, using up oddments of wool. The faint rhythmical clickety noise of her needles almost but not quite eclipsing the starlings in the branches overhead. iridescent chatterboxes preparing for the journey south. I was squinting at the newsprint, too vain for spectacles. There was an ad in the personal columns. It was the usual format. Wanted, resourceful woman. Please bring own basket. I said to Hester, "Look, Hess, there's another one." "Oh, Jude, you said no more. Too old now for that caper. Time to retire, take things easy. Enough with the bloody assignments. Maybe keep chickens instead." But I didn't want to retire yet if there was still work to be done. I looked at her over the top of the paper. That look. "I'll get the basket," she said. The man they had in mind was called Holofernes, a big man, rugged and fierce. He was the manager of a camping and outdoor equipment place with a good many other unsavory business interests besides. Hunted and killed for sport, all kinds of creatures with fins or fur or feathers. Handy with his fists too, macho, thick-skinned. A patriarch, they said, but cruel with it, so cruel. The following day, Hester and I went to see for ourselves. We left Bethulia and traveled on foot over to the next valley, to his emporium. When we arrived at Holofernes' outdoor gear, they were having an end-of-season shindig in the field behind, where the display tents were all strung about with lanterns and plastic bunting, and the yellow grass between the tents walked bald and flat. There were jugs of home-brewed beer and jugs of moonshine, a food stall selling undercooked chicken and overcooked pork. A diddly-dee band had just arrived and were tuning up. Quite a crowd had gathered, and despite all the common signifiers of gaiety, the atmosphere seemed tense and fractious. Some were hoping to avoid trouble. Some were spoiling for a fight. We slipped in through the gate and mingled. There were games, tug of war, wet t-shirt contest, dwarf throwing, pie eating, mud wrestling, bear baiting. Muscle-bound dogs in studded leather harnesses with scars crisscrossing their faces were straining at thick chains, trying to get at two hollow-chested young gladiators who shivered and sobbed as they strapped on heel spurs. Dwarves, large with braggadocio, foul-mouthed and short-tempered, were jeering and hassling girls. The bear wandered aimlessly. He was guzzling moonshine, his big paws clasped around a jug, his fur stinking sour of vomit. We got our first glimpse of Mr. Holofernes, yelling at a blonde in a tight silver dress. "Stupid little bitch, brain the size of a pea, a pinhead." He took a swipe, and she cringed like a whipped cur. "Grrr!" He got right up close, as if he would bite her face. And she broke like a twig and sniveled, Sorry, so sorry, I didn't think." "Of course you didn't think, Tinker Bell. Thinking's not your forte. Out of my sight now, or I'll make you know what sorry tastes like." She scuttled away with her hand to her mouth, stifling sobs. Apparently she had fed his dwarf with pie before the contest. "What's wrong with that?" asked Hester in a low voice, running a hand over her own comfortably convex belly. Bit of pie never hurt anyone. He, Mr. H., was not as tall as I'd expected from the account we'd been given, but solid, all brawn, black-haired and black-beaded, with cold, corvid eyes. We sized him up, calculating the variables, the risk, and watched him move through the crowds, thumbs in his belt, swaggering just a little, two henchmen following behind, and everyone else showing proper deference. They knew their place. He owned everyone hereabouts, a hand in each and every pocket. We had heard of his cruelty. There were accusations of corruption, pimping, extortion, racketeering, trafficking, false imprisonment, torture. But still, we had to see for ourselves. A flunky in a black polo with the HOG logo, the head of a thick-necked wild boar, approached us and tried to hand us drinks. We glanced at his tray of brightly hued plastic beakers and waved him away. His buck-toothed face fell. "Please," he said, stammering just slightly, please take the beer. It's not too bad. It's not as bad as the punch. If Mr. H thinks I haven't been doing my job diligently, he says he will fire me. And if he hears that you ladies refused his hospitality, he could get ugly. Things got pretty ugly anyway. Mr. H and his cronies were boorish, rowdy with liquor. There were fights, some minor injuries, mostly just cuts and bruises, broken noses. "Cold compresses and arnica," muttered Hester, rummaging in her bag. Then a mud wrestler dislocated a knee and was stretchered away, shrieking in agony, and a dwarf thrower had one of his fingers bitten clean off. Hester, who always seems to be prepared, dressed the wound as best she could. She packed it with lint and wrapped clean bandages around, told him to keep the hand elevated. He was so drunk that he seemed to feel no pain. If we had had some ice to pack it in, if we could have found the missing digit, but no, it was gone. Then a ruckus started. While the musicians were taking a break, Mr. H and his brutes started playing catch with their instruments. We watched an accordion arc through the air like an orca again and again, then heard it crash to the ground in a cacophony of jangled wreckage. They jeered and catcalled as it fell and was trashed. Next, Mr. H caught a fiddle that came flying towards him. The others called out to him, to me, over here, boss," holding out their hands in supplication. But seemingly tired of the game or just plain mean, he shrugged and threw the fiddle onto the bonfire. I heard a howl of anguish, and the brutes laughed and cheered, stamping their feet, whistling. The fiddle player pushed his way through and burning his hands trying to get it out, but it was far too gone. The gut pinged, the maple and rosewood scorched, then flames danced, swallowing it completely. Hester drew the fiddler away and daubed his hands with ointment. I watched her tend to him, a wiry little man in shabby black with long fingers like pipe cleaners, now charred and blistered. Of course he was inconsolable. Hester looked at me over the fiddler's shoulder, her gray eyes seeking out my yellow ones. And after all the years together, no words were needed between we two old birds. I had seen enough. He was just as they said he was. I felt sorry for the women and the boys. The pretty ones pawed and molested. The ugly ones jeered at and abused. Sorry for the man in the bear costume who drank to drown his swimming sorrows. Sorry for the dogs with their cloudy eyes and scarred gray muzzles. Sorry for the dwarves, even though they were so coarse in their manners, even though they had been paid handsomely for the night. Sorry for everyone who had the misfortune to work for Mr. H, to be caught in his web. Sorry for all those small people he bullied. Anyway, we ate his pork and we kicked up our heels and danced to his jig, just as if we were not already past our prime. We drank his beer and we peed in his chemical toilets. Late in the evening, I looked for his two henchmen. One had sloped off with one of the hollow-chested boys, and the other had passed out cold beneath a trestle table. I saw my chance to get Mr. H alone. He was sitting by the campfire, still burning, but low and red, embers glowing like dope fiends' eyes, and a fine white ash spread all around that radiated a melancholy warmth. The end of the party. He sat nursing a jug, drunk and maudlin, mumbling to himself, bewailing the skinny bitches, the yes men, and the indoor pussy types. I hitched up my skirts and sat beside him, and he put an arm around my ample arse. Who are you? Do I know you? He was slurring, but not so much. I am Judith. Well, Judith, you're not my type. You know, you're not my type at all. No? Why is that? Too old, too fat. Hey, do I know you? Not yet, I said. He was a pushover. Another drink, and I led him by the cock to a four-man tent. Him looking for a fumble. Me not giving a fuck. Just a job of work to do. I rolled up my sleeves and drew out my blade. His neck was thick, but my first pass sliced clean through the carotid artery. A parabola of lifeblood spouted forth, and I leaned away to keep my dress clean. I leaned away until the blood was no more than a dribble, and the ground was dark, and the air hot and humid like a slaughterhouse. Hester, never far from my side, was standing by in case I couldn't manage, but I grasped his beard and I worked that blade back and forth through bone and gristle. She caught his head in the basket. We left it at the agreed spot, and the money was transferred into my account the following day. Hester is making quince jelly for the women's refuge. Our kitchen is steamy and full of the heady scent and the syrup bubbling, and the little jars are all lined up, warmed and waiting. She stirs the pan and watches, and stirs again, and wipes away a damp strand of hair with the inside of her wrist. And I will write the paper labels, that is my small part. And I have promised her that was the last time. There will be no more.
Our final story is a timeless flash fiction piece written by one of our youngest writers. Sandy Forsyth's wonderfully evocative story, Our Ghostly King, is read for us by John Bett.
On a northern beach, a myriad of standing stones wept, as they are wont to do, keeling into the cool ocean breeze, held upright by the shadow of a spirit kneeling against its tethers to the living world. 1,000, 2,000 years pass. The salty water seasons the air into dryness, and a middle-aged lipstick woman lays a checked picnic blanket to soften the shifting sands. Our spirit cocks a whisper of an ear to the bored drone of her husband's hunger, and lifts the point of a forgotten finger to turn the man's jaw to face the ocean which laps in a different kind of hunger at the shore, its foam white as a ghost. This hunger reaching to the moss of the stones which still hold themselves in an aged royal dignity. The collapse of a kingdom, the spirit's kingdom, is that of third man syndrome, forced complacency, and eager contact with the living, leaving nothing but rubble on a beach, to be viewed in unaffected joy by picnickers who care more for the horizon than the other worldliness at their feet. A feat of trapped desire, which led our ghostly king to cling, like the creeping moss of these graveyard standing stones, to his tenure of land. Ambition latched to one abode that will require a key more eternal than turning eyes to unbounded sea in order to unbind. And, caught between the living and the dead, our ghostly king forgets what it is to end.